Once again, just like game one, in game two, the Alfred Hitchcock Presents defeated the Andy Griffith Show by a final score of 79.83 to 76 because you all voted for Alfred Hitchcock Presents in a very close poll, the most votes so far. Alfred Hitchcock won that poll by 54% of the vote, which is an 8% difference, which was 3 extra points. And now Alfred Hitchcock Presents is ahead 2-0 in this series. That just means 2 more wins for Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And it becomes what I think is a upset in this matchup between the two shows. But let's see what happens in game 3. 4 more episodes of each of these shows to go over. We will be starting with Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and I will say we had some hits in these 4 episodes, and maybe a couple of misses. Really just one episode of the 4 that I found the writing annoyed me. I think so far with Alfred Hitchcock Presents that the writing can be a miss sometimes. Like some episodes, it's fine, maybe a little boring, and other episodes it's pretty good, and then there's some episodes where they just really miss. What I will say about the Alfred Hitchcock show is I think what probably makes the show good in the first place is that you always get a twist at the end, and usually that makes for a better story. Not always, but usually. We're going to start with episode 9, which is called The Long Shot, where indebted Charlie Raymond is hired to a company. He's been trying to get a job because he always blows all of his money on horse betting usually, but just gambling in general and losing all of his money. He's indebted to bookies probably. He gets a job accompanying a man coming from Great Britain, and he has to take the British man around the US, and he finds out that the man was possibly left some money in one of his relatives' wills.
Cinnabar is dropping back. It's Battle Flag, Cinnabar, and Rondelay. Battle Flag, Cinnabar, and Rondelay. At the finish, it's Battle Flag by a neck. Then Cinnabar, Rondelay, and Sully's Girl. Battle Flag by his...
I was on a goat like that a couple of seasons ago at Jamaica. How you can't win them all?
Mr. Hendricks, I could take you on a cook's tour from Kensington Gardens to the East India Docks with my eyes shut.
You won't have to go that far, Mr. Raymond. I lived in London all my life.
The British man's name is Walker Hendricks or something to that effect. So, of course, Charlie's plan is to leave Walker and try and get the money himself and try to act like he is Walker. And he goes so far as to run Walker down, run him over, and kill the man.
What's up, old man?
I'm terribly sorry, but I'm afraid we're lost. I think we better spend the night here. If you're too cramped in the car, you could always sleep outside.
Order up eggs and bacon, toast lightly browned on one side only, and a pot of tea. No tea bag.
And then he's trying to decide, should he go through with this? Should he really try and go get this money? He does.
Heads, I'd do it. Tails, I wouldn't. It came up heads.
And when he does, he's questioned about the person being found murdered. The twist in this is that the Walker that he killed wasn't even the Walker Hendricks either. He was a man named English Jim, who was another con man who killed the real Walker months ago and was trying to get money himself. Charlie then killed the other con man, English Jim, trying to get that money now too, so he ends up going to prison for that murder.
I'm Walker Hendricks. I phoned for an appointment. Well, if there's any problem at all, I'm sure you'll find everything right here.
Not quite. We got one more to add to it. Walker Hendricks' death certificate. Murdered by person or persons unknown.
Buried his body 1,000 miles from nowhere. way out in the middle of the Nevada desert.
We haven't had any reports from Nevada, Raymond. And no one found the body in the desert.
Then how'd you know I killed her?
The real Walker Hendricks was shot in New York and tossed into the East River. We got a tip it was a con man called English Jim who did it.
I thought this episode did a lot of good, where we get to see how some people and their gambling problems go so far. He felt this was always a long shot to be able to pull off this scheme to get this money, and he was right, because he finds himself going to prison in the end. But I did like the twist that the man he killed was also a con man as well. One thing about Alfred Hitchcock also that I'm enjoying, I do think the acting in a lot of these episodes is strong. I think every single episode of these 4 had strong acting. And I think they used some other, some names of the time, at least in TV, and I think even movies. Alfred Hitchcock, probably because he was attached to the project, got a lot of these actors and actresses to be on the show. Now, episode 10, The Case of Mr. Pelham, was probably my least favorite of the 4.
Due to circumstances beyond our control, tragedy will not strike tonight. I'm dreadfully sorry. Perhaps some other time. However, I have just witnessed a sneak preview of this evening's story, and I found it simply frightening. Sometimes death is not the worst that can befall a man, and I don't refer to torture or any type of violence. I mean the quiet little insidious devices that can drive a man out of his mind.
So basically, Mr. Pelham is a man who is starting to find out that there is an exact double of him out there who is trying to take over his life.
The first indication was only about 2 weeks ago. I was leaving my office building in the evening, and an acquaintance, his offices are in the same building as mine, said something about seeing me at the garden the night before at the fights. Well, I thought no more of it, I suppose, just a case of mistaken identity. But a few days later, here at the club, in fact, at that table over there, where Manning and his father are now. Could you come here a moment, please? I'd like you to meet Mr. Hartley of Detroit. This is Tom Mason.
I'm glad to see we're on speaking terms again.
What? What do you mean?
The day before yesterday. You cut me dead right out here at the corner.
Really? I'm dreadfully sorry. I must not have seen you.
Oh, you saw me, all right. Looked me right in the eye.
And it starts to get worse and worse for him, where the other man is coming into his own home and living there, and the other man is even going to his job and working, acting like Mr. Pelham. Mr. Pelham starts to seek therapy because of this.
Didn't I just hear you come in, sir?
Of course I just came in.
When did you go out?
Go out. Peterson, what is the matter with you? Where's my supper?
But you ate it, sir.
So it's kind of obvious from the beginning that the imposter is trying to cause Mr. Pelham to go crazy. This episode almost worked for me. I liked when the two lookalikes came together.
Safest.
What's going on here?
Oh, so there you are.
I didn't think you'd have the gall to...
Don't go away, Peterson. Perhaps you've noticed I've been upset the last few days.
Of course, the housekeeper thinks the imposter is the real Mr. Pelham, and so Mr. Pelham looks like he's just continuing to go crazier and crazier, and he gets locked up, and the imposter takes over his life, basically, which is what Mr. Pelham feared in the first place. I felt like this episode was... Like, there was a good vibe in this episode, which I talk about in my soap operas sometimes when I talk about soap operas, that I like when certain shows have a vibe. Alfred Hitchcock, every episode's different, so I guess they all would have different vibes. This vibe in particular, there was like a vibe of doom and kind of like tension throughout the episode, because what's really going on, where it all went wrong for me, I just didn't feel like the writing was totally fleshed out in the end. And I get the format. This is just a 25-minute story. Every single episode is 25 minutes, and it's a new story. So I only have 25 minutes to tell the story. So this episode just left a lot to be desired because we never found out who the imposter was, as it was just a sci-fi-like episode. But there was no development onto where he came from, who he was, how he was able to do this. Is he a twin? Like, there was just nothing about that in the end. So I had to knock off the writing part, the writing portion of my grade for that, because once again I am grading, I give a grade in writing, a grade in characters, a grade in acting, and a grade on if it's entertaining. All of those out of 100, and then I take an average. This one probably got the lowest grade out of the 4 because I did hit it in the writing section, because I just felt like in the end we were kind of, like, it had a proper ending. Mr. Pelham is in a mental ward because he went totally crazy. But the other side of the story was just not fleshed out enough for me to give us answers. We didn't get answers from this story. Episode 11 is called Guilty Witness. Not quite as high of a grade as I gave episode 9, The Long Shot, but I enjoyed Guilty Witness. Sometimes I like to read online and see what other people thought about these episodes. I felt like this one was underrated, actually. I think this one is underrated because it's obvious from the beginning. Like, it's kind of a mystery. It's supposed to be a mystery, but it's also supposed to not be a mystery. The Crane family overhears their neighbors, the Verbers, having a violent argument, and then there's like a thud, and then they don't hear anything else, so they suspect that the wife, well, first they suspect that the husband killed the wife, but then they see that the wife is alive. Mrs. Werner is out and about, but her husband has gone missing, so they of course suspect that she killed him.
Stanley, it's getting worse.
And your dinner's getting cold.
He threatened her. I tell you, this is serious.
She'll get in a few of her own in a minute.
I'd like some candy, please.
Right. Yes, of course, Mrs. Verber. What kind?
Well, it doesn't matter, and I just got a craving for something sweet.
Well.
And at first, the wife, Mrs. Crane, is the one who's more into finding out what happened to Mr. Werner, but then the husband also finds himself becoming more and more involved as to what happened to their neighbor. In the end, the twist is Mr. Verber was always a cad and always with different women, and that's why he had that violent argument with his wife in the first place. That's also why the twist works in the end, because it comes out that the reason that the wife killed him, which she did, is because he was also having an affair with Mrs. Crane.
He couldn't support his own kids. On account he had to support her. That's why I killed him. That wasn't his fault. It was yours. You're the one I should have killed. You were going to take him away from me. He was leaving me for you.
As I'm going over this episode, I find it very hard to describe because there's two different couples, and the last name I don't like, the Verbers. But I did enjoy the episode in the end, despite the obvious mystery. It wasn't really a mystery. It was pretty obvious that the wife killed him from the beginning. It was just them trying to figure out what really happened. The twist I did like. It's not like some earth-shattering twist that Miss Crane was one of the women he was being nefarious and having an affairs with. The episode ends with Miss Verber attacking Miss Crane as Mr. Crane looks on shocked to find out that his wife was also carrying on with Mr. Verber. Lastly was an interesting thing. We got a Christmas episode out of Alfred Hitchcock Presents called Santa Claus and the 10th Avenue Kid.
I'll tell you what plans we have for your rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation? Looks to me like she could do with a bit of rehabilitating herself.
Oh, there you are, Sid. Oh, and you look good. Very good indeed.
Yes, well, I don't feel good.
Oh, that's not the proper Christmas spirit.
I think this episode just worked because it was a nice change of pace, very different from other episodes so far on this show. A Christmas episode where basically Mr. Sears is like a petty criminal who's always in jail for petty crimes. He's on parole and finds a job as a Santa Claus in a department store, which he doesn't want to do, but they are trying to rehabilitate him. And he comes across many children being Santa Claus, and one in particular, though, gives him a hard time. He's kind of a bad-tempered boy. He wants a toy plane that's hanging in the store that's not for sale.
If you're not interested in Santa Claus, what are you doing here?
Looking around. Anyhow, I already told you, you ain't Santa Claus.
In the end, he's trying to steal things in the store, and Mr. Sears, who is a criminal and been in prison before, is trying to stop him and trying to tell him to not be spending all this time doing this because he will turn out in prison. He won't get the toys he wants in jail. Basically, he's trying to stop the kid from becoming him. But he does help the kid because the kid didn't believe in Santa Claus, didn't believe he was Santa Claus. He steals the toy plane from the store and gives it to the kid in the end, even though that almost ruins his life and his parole. But he is saved by Miss Webster, who has been the one that's been trying to rehabilitate him. So a very different episode here, but I think the main thing that worked for me was the acting by Barry Fitzgerald, who played Sears / Santa Claus. So all around, I gave Alfred Hitchcock Presents a 77.39 with my grade. It keeps going up in my grading. It started pretty low in Game 1. Game 2 went up and a lot compared to Game 1, and Game 3 goes up a little bit. So I think I am enjoying Alfred Hitchcock Presents more as we go along here. Some episodes, the writing leaves a lot to be desired, but you always get good acting, and you always get a twist. Some of them are better than others, but I think those are the two elements that work best with this show, and probably what made it popular in the first place, the acting and the twists. Andy Griffith's show, we're going over 4 more episodes here. Look, let's just get into this again. The one thing I'm always going to knock this show for, I think, is the fact that it's not that funny. It's just not that funny, I'm sorry. I find when I read about these shows to see if I'm crazy, am I the only one that doesn't find this show that funny? I don't think that's true. On other messages, message boards, Reddit, I think that this show is kind of known for putting writing before humor, which is fine. It's great. It's a very well-written show. Andy Griffith is very well written for a sitcom, especially of the time. So I will always give it good grades in the writing department. But in the entertaining department, every time I grade a sitcom, and I'm going to say this every time I grade a sitcom during this tournament probably, if it's actually funny, it's going to get a higher rating. If it's not that funny, it's going to get a kind of low rating in the entertainment category from me. It's a sitcom. It should be funny. But there was some comedic moments we'll get to, and one good episode. The other 3 episodes were mediocre, honestly. Episode 9 is called A Feud is a Feud. I don't know if I've talked about this yet, but Andy Griffith's, the accent on Andy Griffith here, that's just like such a country bumpkin, and it's so deep of an accent, can be annoying. Well, it fits the area, this is supposed to be like small town Carolina. It works sometimes. In this episode, it worked better than others, because in most episodes, it gets on my nerves. But the accent was real thick here, and it works because this episode deals with 2 mountain families that have been feuding for like 87 years.
Your deputy told me to come up here and meet you, Sheriff. What's up and what's he doing here?
Ain't you heard we was feuding?
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, your feud. Now, I looked up the records, old sheriff's records and hospital records and such as that for the past 87 years, and do you know what?
What?
They ain't never been nigh Wakefield nor Carter that was so much as even hit.
Well, it ain't because we wasn't trying.
Dang Wakefields keep moving around.
And it's come to a point where the families don't know why they even started feuding in the first place. And that's what Andy has to try and figure out when the 2 young members of the family want to marry each other, and the fathers in the families don't want this to be a thing. So Andy has to try and help the young couples, especially because Aunt B is trying to get Andy to help do this as well.
Like that.
What are you trying to do?
What kind of feud is that? Well, now that's the way the French folks used to settle their arguments. See, the umpire, now that's me, I'll be the umpire, would count off to 10. And the contestants, now that'll be you boys, would start walking. And when I get to 10, why the contestants, now that's you, why you swing around and start popping at one another. All right. Just nice. All right? Good luck now, fellas. And, goodbye. I reckon you all will see one another in that great feuding country beyond. Ready? 1. Fellas, you're supposed to walk when I start counting.
Well, a fella's legs gets mighty heavy.
Yeah, everybody knows fella gets our age, first thing goes is his legs.
Well, it's just a short walk, and it's the last time you'll be a-using them.
Despite this episode not being that funny, I did find it entertaining enough because I enjoyed the concept. I enjoyed how Andy was telling Opie about Romeo and Juliet and how that this was similar to that story. And of course, the writing was good throughout it. So this was a solid episode where Andy comes through in the end, helping the couple marry and helping the families kind of stop feuding by the end of it. Episode 10 is called Ellie For Council. This episode, there's a lot of scuttlebutt on the internet about this episode because it's a sign of the times. I feel like on one side of the coin, people don't like that this episode is so heavy-handed in trying to paint women's rights, I guess, whatever. And then on the other side, of course, of the political spectrum, some people don't like that this episode is so misogynist towards the women in this episode. But this episode is from, December of 1960. So you have to put the mindset that this is from 1960, and it's actually probably from that time very progressive of a story. It's where Ellie wants to run for city council because of Andy kind of being misogynist basically, and the men in Mayberry taking the women for granted. That's why she wants to run for council in the first place. And Andy doesn't think women should be running for council. And Andy is painted in this episode being a country bumpkin, being very kind of misogynist, and he doesn't really realize how bad this might be until Opie kind of regurgitates some of his crap he was talking about women earlier in the episode. In the end, Andy does help Ellie run.
Against a woman running for council. All right. I don't know what I'm getting at is I hate to admit it, but if Ellie wants to run for council, well, I reckon she's got a right to.
A speech about how Opie was turning anti-woman and how the town needs to kind of support their women. We got some good scenes where the women were having kind of being liberated and kind of making their husbands do some of the house chores, which they were failing at. Some other funny scenes of Andy having to cook for Opie because Aunt Bee's mad at Andy about this whole situation and Opie not enjoying Andy's food. So this episode had good moments, but I think it's just kind of clunky, I guess, in the writing department. I think this was probably the weakest written episode of the 4, although the last episode as well, we'll get to here soon. But this episode, it was fine. It was fine. I understood the job it was trying to do. Some were going to find it heavy-handed, and then others are going to find it too misogynistic. It's the two extreme political spectrums. What can you do? The truth is somewhere in the middle. The episode was fine. Episode 11 is called Christmas Story, so we have a Christmas episode for Andy Griffith. Here, it was probably better than the Christmas episode from Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Oh, your sweetheart sent you a card for Christmas, did she?
Yeah, Christmas she was.
Yeah? Well, what'd she say that was sweet?
Merry Christmas, Barney.
Oh, now, come on, Barney. You can tell me what she said. What'd she say to you that was so sweet? What?
Barney, Parney, Pooh. I don't open anymore.
We get a story about a grouchy old businessman named Ben Weaver who wants Sam Muggins, who was always making moonshine, arrested even though it's Christmas Eve. And so Andy has no choice but to kind of lock up Ben. But Andy and Barney want it to still feel like the spirit of Christmas, so they bring Ben's family to the jail, and then Ellie and Aunt Bee, and they end up having a whole Christmas celebration going on Christmas weekend for Christmas. And Ben seems jealous of it all.
All right, Sheriff. Lock him up.
What for?
Moonshiner.
Oh, I don't get you to hug you, Danny. Oh, we're going to have a Merry Christmas after all, huh?
All right, Sheriff. I warned you I was going to be watching out for your shenanigans.
He's always looking in on it, and he starts trying to get himself arrested because he wants in on it. He starts breaking laws to kind of get arrested and end up at their Christmas party.
What in the world do you think you're doing?
I'm taking a bend.
Ain't to you, but I certainly would feel mighty bad if I had to lock a fella up for Christmas. Now, you just put the bench back where it was and go on home.
I ain't gonna do it.
And in the end, I think Andy realizes that Ben is grouchy because he's just a lonely old man who actually does want to be liked. So this was a sweet episode. I can be a sucker for Christmas episodes, and I'm a sucker for this episode.
What's the matter? Santa Claus, did you park your reindeers out in the back? Well, let's go, Ben. Let's get locked up.
Dad?
This got my highest rating of the 4 because it was well written. It was very Christmas, heartwarming storyline, you know? Lastly is called Stranger in Town. The pros of this episode was more Barney.
I tried living right here back of the shop once, but it was no good. The old lady yammering on the phone, cooking smells coming out of the walls. It was bad for business.
Floyd, you ain't getting them sideburns too short, are you?
Not just...
Oh, Andy, you tell me, how these sideburns look to you?
What sideburn?
Doggone, I knew it. You always do this. You're clipper happy.
What are you fussing about?
My sideburns, where are they? Are they on the side or are they on the top?
Well, neither place. They're right here on the floor.
Boy, I told you.
If this show would just have more Barney, it would probably be funnier. And I read online that we get more Barney after season 1. So if Andy Griffith survives against Alfred Hitchcock, which we'll see, maybe the show will get funnier because of more Barney. Barney had some funny moments in this episode. Getting his one sideburn shaved shorter than the other because his barber was distracted. Him being so paranoid because the stranger has come to town and knows everybody's names and knows everything about everyone, but nobody knows who he is. So this has made others very paranoid too, but especially Barney, which leads to a lot of funny scenes of Barney trying to figure out this whole guy's deal.
So long, Barney.
be, Barney?
I don't rightly know yet. Gotta keep my eye on him. What's his room number again?
216.
216, huh? Well, Mr. Sawyer, we're just gonna have to look around your room.
Turns out he knows everything about everyone because he, even though he's not from Mayberry, he subscribed to the Mayberry newspaper and read it all every day. And he came to town because he wanted to meet Lucy Matthews, who was a very beautiful woman in Mayberry. But I guess the lesson at the end of this episode is what Andy kind of preaches in the end, is that it's a small town and they're being kind of prejudiced to the newbie in town, even though he went about it all wrong and he came off as a weirdo. I thought the writing in this episode was the weakest of the bunch, but it was the funniest episode of the bunch because Barney was funny in this episode. So that kind of evened out the rating, the grade for me. My overall grade for Andy Griffith Show this game is 73.95, so slightly lower than Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So if you guys would like to leave comments about which show, if you're watching along, we are doing episode 9 through 12 for each of these shows. Season 1, episode 9 through 12 for both Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Andy Griffith Show. If you're watching along, which one did you like more? Let me know in the comments, or you can vote in the poll that I have put up on the YouTube.